Last week, I came upon a video that sums up God's entire plan in terms of his covenants with humans. As I watched, I thought of several ways in which his plan could have been improved. So I decided to share my suggestions here today. Let's have a look.
If you've been around Christians, you've probably heard of the idea of having a personal relationship with God, which could mean different things in the Bible, like having God as a friend, or your father, or maybe your teacher.
But there's one particular way that the Bible talks about this relationship that you find all over. But strangely, we don't talk about it that much, and that's the idea of a partnership with God.
A partnership like working alongside someone to accomplish a goal together.
Okay, so first off, I'm not sure it makes sense for you to have a goal there, God. A goal, by definition, is something a person hopes to accomplish. And by definition, people only hope for things that take time and have an uncertain outcome. So since you can accomplish whatever you want instantly and conclusively, shouldn't you just do that?
Right, and this is actually what you see at the beginning of the Bible. God creates this good world full of all of this potential. And then God appoints these unique creatures, humans, as his partners in bringing more and more goodness out of all that potential.
But the humans don't want to partner with God. They rebel and try to create a world on their own terms.
Rebel is a strong word to use to describe naive people who don't know the difference between right and wrong getting tricked by a clever snake into eating fruit you put right in front of them. Perhaps you might want to give them knowledge of good and evil to start with so they know how to make the right choice.
And so this broken partnership is the Bible's explanation for why we're stuck in a world of corruption and injustice and the tragedy of death.
It's not like there's just one or two humans who have bailed on this relationship. In the story of the Bible, everyone has abandoned the partnership with God.
Okay, at this point you might just want to chill a little bit. I'm not sure everybody specifically decided to abandon you. Adam and Eve made that decision for themselves. So if it was their decision and they wanted to live with the consequences, maybe you could approach all the other people on earth personally and offer them your covenant. If they accept it, then awesome. If not, then it makes sense to say they all rejected you.
So what God does is select a smaller group of people out of the many, and he makes a new partnership with them called a covenant.
Ooh, so why just with a few people? I thought the idea I gave you was pretty good, and it gave everybody a fighting chance.
And in a covenant, God makes promises, and then in exchange asks his partner to fulfill certain commitments.
A mutual agreement? That's your best idea? You know everything, right, God? So maybe just instruct everybody on right and wrong, then use your wisdom to guide them all toward good decisions. I don't mean to be impudent, but coming up with a simple contract with a few people, punishing them when they break it, and leaving everybody else out in the cold seems like, well, to be frank, it seems like a much worse idea.
And the purpose of all of this is to somehow use this covenant relationship to renew his partnership with everybody else.
Yeah, like I said, God, that's a very roundabout way to get to all the other people on Earth. Maybe you can go back and look at the much simpler plan I proposed a few seconds back?
Now, there are actually 4 times in the Old Testament that we're told God initiates a covenant relationship with Noah, Abraham, the nation of Israel, and King David.
And it's through these that God is forming a covenant family into which all people will eventually be invited.
Eventually, but not right away. Chew on the implications of that for a while.
So let's see how these work. The first one is with Noah.
So in this story, God has just brought the flood to cleanse the world of humanity's corruption.
There are way more intelligent ways to deal with corruption.
And Noah and his family are the only ones left. And so God makes a covenant with Noah, saying, listen, I know that humans will continue to be evil, but despite that, I'm not going to destroy it like this again.
I'll have to admit that's a pretty good idea. But you were a little late realizing something so obvious. And on a side note, I'm a bit concerned that the only reason you came to this decision is that you liked the way it smelled when Noah burned an animal.
Instead, the earth will be this reliable place for us to work together.
Great. So what does Noah have to do?
Nothing. And that's what's so interesting about this first covenant, is that God is promising to be faithful, even though he knows humans won't be.
You know they won't be. So it seems to me you're fully aware that these covenants are going to bite us all in the ass.
The next time we see God make a covenant is with a man named Ibrahim. God chooses him, promises to bless him, give him a large family, lots of land where they can flourish.
And in return, God asks Abraham to trust him and train up his family to do what is right and just.
And by trust him to train up his family to do what is right and just, they mean cut the skin off the tip of his penis and force his family and slaves to do the same. Because that's all you asked of Abraham in his covenant. Right, God? Right?
And the whole reason for this covenant is God says that somehow he's going to bring his blessing to all families of the world through this one family.
Again, why aren't you just speaking directly to all the other... Oh, it. I give up on this point.
So that's Abraham. The next time we see God make a covenant is when Abraham's family grows into the tribe of Israel.
And this covenant is with the whole tribe. God asks them to obey a set of laws, which are these guidelines for living well as a community of God's partners.
So God, if you're going to give people guidelines for community living, maybe have fewer rules about religious ceremony and instead mention things like rape, slavery, or child abuse. Good idea, maybe? And then maybe don't confuse the issue by having your Bible retcon the same 10 Commandments, only to have it mention more about festivals and how to cook goats.
And if they do this, then God promises to bless them and that they will become a people who then represent him to the rest of humanity.
This would be much more compelling if your Israelites didn't most often represent you to the rest of humanity by killing them all and raping their daughters at your command.
That's the covenant with Israel. The last covenant is with King David.
Yeah, the tribe of Israel has become this large nation ruled by David. And God asked David and his descendants to partner with him by leading Israel in obeying the laws and doing what is right and just. And God promises that one day, one of David's sons will come and extend God's kingdom of peace and blessing over all the nations.
Yeah, what this covenant really said is that David's descendants would rule Israel forever. If you wanted it to be about using Jesus to spread your healing love to the world, maybe you should have made sure it said so. And if you wanted it to allude to Jesus, perhaps it would have been best not to have the only specific reference to one of David's sons mention that he's likely to sin and that God will punish him whenever he does. This makes it sound an awful lot like you're not talking about Jesus.
So those are the 4 covenants that God makes in order to restore his partnership with the whole world.
But here's what happens. Israel breaks the covenant. They worship other gods, they allow horrible injustice, and so they lose their land and are forced off into exile.
So it seems hopeless. But during this time, Israel's prophets talked about a day when God would restore these covenants in spite of Israel's failure, somehow.
Yeah, they called it the New Covenant.
This new covenant sounds like the plan B you use to fix things after your initial covenant falls apart. But here's the thing, God, and I know I've mentioned this before, but you know everything. And if your plan was to make a deal with Israel, knowing full well they were going to break the deal, then come up with a new deal that would work better than the first one, shouldn't you just have skipped the original deal? Maybe this new covenant should have just been your plan A, since you knew it was the only one that was going to work.
And this is actually what's so interesting about Jesus, is that he's introduced into this story as the one who fulfills all of these covenant relationships.
Of all the things you could have worried about, was it really that vital to go through such lengths to satisfy the specific verbiage of a Bronze Age contract?
We're told that he's from the family of Abraham, and so he will bring the blessings of that family to the whole world.
So it's important that a physical descendant of Abraham plays this role? This is sounding less like the plan of an all-knowing God and more like the magical rules of the Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter universe.
We're told that he's the faithful Israelite who was able to truly obey the law.
So your whole plan was predicated on the knowledge that only Jesus could ever obey the law. So maybe you shouldn't have kept acting so shocked and put out every time someone else failed to do so.
And we're told that he's the king from the line of David, and so he goes about extending God's kingdom of justice and peace to all.
Yeah, God. Justice and peace are just abstract words we use to sum up people's behavior. If you want to spread them, just instruct people in the behavior you want to see. They aren't magical things that need to be spread by the descendant of an ancient king.
And that's really remarkable for one guy.
All of this only hinges on one guy because you set things up that way. So maybe you shouldn't have?
Yeah, and what it highlights is perhaps the most surprising claim of all made about this man, that Jesus is no mere human, but rather God become human. And God did this in order to be that faithful covenant partner that we are all made to be, but have failed to be.
People broke a covenant with you, and that bothered you. So your solution was to re-enter into the same agreement with yourself? And were you going to feel better about everybody else's behavior just because you were able to keep the agreement with yourself? Because if so, you might just be beyond help here.
And so through Jesus, God has opened up a way for anyone to be in a renewed partnership with him.
Again, God, not to beat this point to death, but if you want to let every person have the chance to accept or reject you, just set things up this way from the start. There was no use for all the complicated steps that led to this.
So Jesus calls people to follow him and become part of this new covenant family.
And despite their failures, Jesus is committed to making them into partners who are becoming more and more faithful.
And yes, God, I sincerely agree this is a great goal. I just don't think the best way to achieve it is to make an agreement with a select few people you know are going to break it, come remake the agreement with yourself after they break it, and then rely on a written document and other people to instruct them in how to be more faithful. Why couldn't you have just created the universe in such a way that misbehavior did not have magical hereditary properties? Then you could have just appeared to every person after Adam and Eve's sin and made your instructions perfectly clear, so they could all know you existed and be free to make an informed decision of whether or not to follow you. Now I know we're a little late in the game for that, but you being a timeless God and all, perhaps you could go back to the beginning and make a plan that doesn't result in so many uninformed people needlessly going to hell.